Hello students, welcome to the biology class. Today we are going to continue with our 17th chapter, breathing and exchange of gases. In our previous session, we discussed about the various steps of respiration, breathing, pulmonary capacities, and today we are going to explain about the gas exchange. Exchange of gases occur between the alveoli and the blood. So alveoli are the sac-like structures which are being surrounded by the blood capillaries and then from blood and tissue. Alveoli are the primary sites of gas exchange and exchange of the gases, that is the O2 and CO2 exchanged by the simple diffusion. The factor that influencing the exchange of gases, that is pressure concentration gradient. Gradient means the difference. Number 2 is solubility of the gases, thickness of membrane and surface area of respiratory membrane, that is your lungs. The factor influencing the first factor, that is your pressure and the concentration gradient, the individual pressure of gas in the gas mixture is called partial pressure. That is called as your partial pressure. Partial pressure of O2 and CO2, that is PO2 and PCO2 means that is the partial pressures. The individual pressure of the gases in the gas mixture, that is known as the partial because the air is the mixture of gases. And atmospheric air having the partial pressure of oxygen is 159 whereas CO2 is 0.3. Alveoli, that is 104 and 40. Deoxygenated is 40 and 45. Oxygenated is 95 and 40. Whereas tissue, they are having a oxygen as a 40 and CO2 as the 45. Partial pressure in the alveoli is more than in the blood capillaries. So this is your alveoli indication where the partial pressure of oxygen is more as compared to the blood capillaries. Therefore, because of this pressure gradient, O2 diffuses into the blood capillaries and CO2 in the oxygenated blood is more than it is in the alveolus. So CO2 diffuses into the alveoli. So here because of the difference of the pressure gradient, so they move from the higher to the lower side. Next factor that influences the gas exchange is the solubility of the gases. Solubility of CO2 is 20 to 25 times higher than O2. Means carbon dioxide, they are being soluble in the blood. That's why in our veins we are having a green color because of the soluble CO2. So the amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher than the oxygen. The third factor is the thickness of the membrane. Diffusion membrane is made up of 3 layers. So this is your alveoli cavity, this is your blood capillaries. In between we are having the membrane, that is your squamous epithelium of alveoli. Then there is an endothelium of alveolar capillaries and the basement membrane between them. So its only thickness, that is 0.5 micrometer, it enables the easy exchange of the gas. The last factor which influences the surface area of the respiratory membrane, that is your lungs. So the presence of alveoli increase the surface area of the lungs and with that the increase of the gaseous exchange takes place. So these are the factors which influence the exchange of the gases. The next we will discuss about the gas transport, that is O2 and CO2, that how they are being transported from alveoli to the blood, from blood to the tissues, from tissues to the blood and then back to the alveoli through which they are going to be exhaled. So it is the transport of respiratory gases O2 and CO2 from alveoli to the systematic tissues and vice versa. So O2 transport lungs to the tissues and CO2 from tissues to the lungs, and there is in the various forms. First we will discuss about the O2 transport. In the physical solution, that is in the blood plasma, 3% of oxygen is carried by dissolving in the plasma. Rest of 97% of O2 is transported by the hemoglobin, the red color pigment which is present in the blood, that is in the RBCs. O2 that binds with the hemoglobin is a reversible manner to form the oxyhemoglobin, and that is known as oxygenation. So hemoglobin that combines with oxygen and that forms the oxyhemoglobin, the process is known as oxygenation. Hemoglobin has a 4 units, heme units. So each hemoglobin molecule can carry the 4 oxygen molecule. Binding of oxygen depends upon the partial pressure of O2 and CO2, hydrogen ion concentration and temperature. In alveoli, there is a high partial pressure of oxygen, low partial pressure of CO2, lesser hydrogen ion concentration and the lower temperature. So these factors that favors the formation of oxyhemoglobin with high partial pressure of oxygen, lesser partial pressure of CO2, lesser hydrogen ion concentration and lower temperature. In tissues, there is opposite to that, that is a low oxygen, high partial pressure of CO2, high hydrogen ion concentration and higher temperature. Because of that, that hemoglobin, that is oxyhemoglobin, that is going to be dissociates into the hemoglobin and oxygen, and now this oxygen is available to the tissues. So every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around the 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues under the normal physiological conditions. So when we plot the graph between the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen against the partial pressure of oxygen, the shape of the graph that comes out to be the S shape, or you can say the sigmoid curve, is obtained, and it is used to study the effect of factors like the partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration on binding of oxygen with hemoglobin, that is oxygenation process. This is oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve when CO2, that is the partial pressure of CO2 is high, hydrogen concentration is high, temperature is high, then oxyhemoglobin, they dissociate to form the oxygen and hemoglobin. Next is the transport of CO2. In tissue, the CO2 is high due to catabolism and the partial pressure of O2 is low. In lungs, the partial pressure of CO2 is low and the partial pressure of O2 is high. This favors the CO2 transport from tissues to the lungs, and that carries by the 3 ways. Number 1 is as carbonic acid, number 2 as the carbinohemoglobin, and the last is as bicarbonate. So 7% is dissolved in the plasma, whereas 23% that combines with the hemoglobin, that is carbinohemoglobin, and the rest of 70% is converted into bicarbonate ions that transport as bicarbonate. As carbonic acid, that is the first form in the tissues, 7% CO2 is dissolved in the plasma. From the tissue, 7% dissolved in the plasma water to form the carbonic acid and carried to the lungs. In tissues, 20 to 25% of CO2 bind with the hemoglobin to form the carbinohemoglobin, and in alveoli, the CO2 dissociates from the carbinohemoglobin and then exhaled out. Whereas about the 70% of CO2 is transported by the form of bicarbonate, how they are going to be formed. RBCs, they contains the enzyme that is known as a carbonic anhydrase. At the tissue site, it facilitates a following reaction. The CO2 plus water in the presence of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase forms the bicarbonate acid. That is carbonic anhydrate, they are going to dissociate to form the bicarbonate and the hydrogen ions. So in alveoli, the above reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of CO2 and H2O, and now this CO2 is being exhaled out. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers the 4 ml of CO2 to the alveoli. So after finishing the exchange of the gases and the transport of the oxygen, now the regulation of respiration. In brain, there are the following respiratory centers. Number 1 is respiratory rhythm center. Then there is a nematoxic center and the chemosensitive area which are being present in the brain. That is your nematoxic area. Then we are having our chemosensitive areas, and this is our rhythmic center. Respiratory rhythm center means inspiratory or expiratory centers, which gives the command when to inspire, when to expire, seen in the medulla oblongata. So this is your medulla oblongata where it takes place, and it regulates the respiratory rhythms in a very perfect manner. The inspiration and expiration takes place. Next is your nematoxic center that is seen in the pons. Fine. So it moderates the function of the respiratory rhythm center. Impulses from this center reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. So this is the pons where that particular nematoxic center is situated, and they moderate the function of the respiratory rhythm. The last is a chemosensitive area seen adjacent to the rhythm center. Increase the concentration of CO2 and hydrogen ions. Activate this center, which in turn signal the rhythm center if CO2 concentration is going to be high. Receptors in the aortic arch and the carotid artery also recognize the changes in the CO2 and hydrogen ion concentration, and they send the signal to the rhythm center. Role of oxygen in the regulation of rhythm center is quite insignificant, whereas CO2 plays a very significant role. So after the regulation, we will discuss about the disorders of the respiratory system. So the disorder, the first and the very common disorder of our respiration is the asthma. It is caused by the hypersensitivity of the bronchioles to any foreign substances. It is characterized by the spasm of the smooth muscles. Spasm means they become swell up of the walls of the bronchioles, and there is a difficulty in breathing, causing the wheezing, means sound ana, due to the inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. The next disorder is emphysema. It is the chronic disorders in which the alveolar walls are damaged and the respiratory surface is going to be reduced, and the major cause of emphysema is the cigarette, in which the alveoli they becomes blocked because of the tar formation, and the respiratory area is going to be decreased, and now they becomes difficult in breathing. The next is your occupational respiratory disorder, where you are going to work. So these diseases occur in the person who work in the certain industries like the granules, the breaking of the stones, or their working in the industries produce so many dusts. So the defense mechanism of the body cannot cope with this situation. So there is so much of the dust produced which the defense mechanism of body is not able to cope with the situation, and long exposure that leads to the fibrosis, inflammation, and that results in the lung damage. So workers in such industry should wear the protective mask. So with this we finish our chapters. So in our next session we will discuss the next chapter, that is the body fluids, in which we will discuss about the body fluids and their transportation, means in which we discuss about the circulatory system related with our heart. Till then, stay home, stay happy. Thank you and have a nice day.